What would you do if you discovered that the quiet woman living alone on the marina wasn't just another boat owner, but someone who had spent years in the world's most dangerous places, trained to handle threats most people couldn't imagine? This is the true story of how three opportunistic thieves learned that appearances can be deadly deceiving, and how one woman's past came rushing back to protect her future. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pelican Bay Marina as Sarah Chun tied the final knot on her boat's mooring line. The 38-year-old woman moved with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands working the rope with muscle memory that spoke of countless hours on the water. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another boat enthusiast preparing for a day of fishing or leisure cruising. Her sun-bleached hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were the standard marina uniform of faded jeans, deck shoes, and a well-worn polo shirt. But appearances, as three men would soon discover, could be fatally misleading. Sarah had purchased the 42-foot Sportfisher 8 months earlier, paying cash and asking few questions. The boat, named Second Chance, had become her sanctuary after 20 years of service that she rarely discussed with her new neighbors at the marina. She kept to herself, was polite but distant, and seemed to prefer the company of seagulls to that of humans. Marina manager Tom Rodriguez had grown accustomed to Sarah's routine. She arrived before dawn, spent her days either maintaining her boat or taking it out on solo fishing trips, and returned by sunset. She paid her slip fees on time, never caused trouble, and had an uncanny ability to fix mechanical problems that stumped other boat owners. What Tom didn't know was that Sarah's expertise with engines had been honed in far more dangerous waters than the peaceful bay that surrounded their marina. 3 slips down from Sarah's boat, Marcus Webb was watching her through binoculars from the cabin of his own vessel. At 45, Marcus had made a living on the edges of society, specializing in opportunities that others overlooked. He had noticed Sarah's solitary habits and, more importantly, the expensive fishing equipment she kept aboard her boat. Electronics worth tens of thousands of dollars, rods and reels that cost more than most people's cars, and navigation equipment that suggested serious offshore capability. Marcus had been planning for weeks. He knew Sarah's schedule, understood that she took her boat out every Tuesday and Friday, and had observed that she kept minimal security. The marina itself was quiet, with only a part-time security guard who was more interested in his crossword puzzles than patrolling the docks. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for what Marcus considered a victimless crime. After all, insurance would cover the loss, and someone with enough money to own such a boat could certainly afford to replace it. What Marcus couldn't see through his binoculars was the small, weathered identification card that Sarah kept in a sealed plastic bag, tucked away in a hidden compartment behind the boat's electrical panel. The card bore her photograph and the words United States Navy, along with a designation that would have made Marcus reconsider his entire plan: Special Warfare Operator. Sarah's journey to this quiet marina had begun 22 years earlier in a Navy recruiter's office in San Diego. Fresh out of high school and looking for direction, she had signed up with dreams of seeing the world and serving her country. What she hadn't expected was to find herself breaking barriers in one of the military's most exclusive communities. Women weren't officially allowed in Navy SEAL teams, but Sarah had found her way into the equally demanding and secretive world of special warfare support operations. Her first deployment took her to the Persian Gulf, where she learned that her small stature and unassuming appearance were actually advantages in intelligence gathering operations. While she couldn't carry the SEAL designation, she worked alongside them, often going places and gathering information that larger, more obvious operators couldn't access. Her specialty became maritime operations in hostile waters, boarding suspicious vessels, and conducting reconnaissance in environments where discovery meant death. Over 2 decades, Sarah had operated in the South China Sea, off the coast of Somalia during the height of piracy, in the Mediterranean during counterterrorism operations, and in waters so classified that even now, years after retirement, she couldn't discuss them with anyone lacking proper clearance. She had been shot at, nearly drowned, and had learned to sleep with one eye open and her hand on a weapon. The scars from those years weren't visible to casual observers. A small mark on her left shoulder from shrapnel, a barely perceptible limp from a parachute landing gone wrong, and hands that bore the calluses of rope work and weapons handling. But the most significant changes were internal. Sarah had developed an awareness of her surroundings that never switched off, an ability to assess threats, and plan responses that had kept her alive in some of the world's most dangerous places. When she finally retired from active duty, Sarah had struggled with civilian life. The constant vigilance that had been essential for survival felt like paranoia in peaceful settings. Simple activities like grocery shopping became exercises in tactical awareness. She found herself noting exit routes, potential weapons, and escape plans even in the most mundane situations. The boat had been her therapist's suggestion. Dr. Martinez had recommended that Sarah find an activity that utilized her maritime skills in a peaceful context. The open water provided the solitude she craved while engaging the part of her that felt most comfortable on the sea. For 8 months, it had worked. The daily routine of boat maintenance and solo fishing trips had given her life structure and purpose without the life-or-death stakes of her former career. Marcus Webb knew none of this as he finalized his plans. He had recruited 2 associates for the job. Danny Price, a 28-year-old mechanic with a gambling problem and flexible morals, and Rico Santos, a 35-year-old ex-con who specialized in marine theft. The plan was simple. They would wait until Sarah took her boat out for one of her regular trips, then board second chance when she returned, overpower her if necessary, and sail away with their prize. They had identified a buyer in Mexico who asked no questions and paid fair prices for quality vessels. The 3 men had spent the previous evening drinking beer and going over their plan. Marcus had assured his partners that the woman would be no problem. She was alone, probably had no experience with violence, and would likely cooperate rather than risk getting hurt over property that was insured anyway. Rico had expressed some concern about robbing a woman, but Marcus had convinced him that they weren't really hurting anyone. The boat would be reported stolen, insurance would pay out, and everyone would move on with their lives. What they didn't know was that Sarah had noticed their surveillance weeks ago. Her training had made her sensitive to patterns of observation. She had spotted Marcus watching her boat, noticed when the same 3 men appeared together on days when she was preparing for trips, and observed the way they positioned themselves to have clear sight lines to her slip. A civilian might have dismissed it as coincidence or paranoid imagination, but Sarah's experience had taught her that coincidences were rare and paranoia could be a survival tool. She had begun taking precautions without changing her routine in ways that would alert the watchers. Her fishing trips now included weapons secured in hidden compartments. She had installed additional security equipment that wasn't visible to casual observation. Most importantly, she had begun varying her return times and routes in ways that appeared random, but were actually tactical. On the Tuesday morning, when Marcus and his team decided to execute their plan, Sarah was more ready than they could have imagined. She departed the marina at dawn as usual, but instead of heading to her normal fishing grounds, Sarah anchored second chance in a secluded cove just 2 miles from the marina. From there, she could monitor radio traffic and maintain visual contact with the marina using high-power binoculars. She had learned patience in waters where moving too soon could mean death, and she was prepared to wait all day if necessary. Marcus, Danny, and Rico positioned themselves at different points around the marina, communicating through cheap walkie-talkies they had purchased at a sporting goods store. Their plan called for them to wait until Sarah returned and began her usual routine of cleaning and securing her boat. They would approach under the pretense of asking about fishing conditions, then quickly board and take control of the situation. What they hadn't anticipated was Sarah's military-grade communications equipment and her ability to monitor their radio frequency. From her hidden position, she listened to their conversations and quickly understood their intentions. The voices were nervous but determined, discussing timing and positions with the amateur confidence of criminals who had never faced serious opposition. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest as her old training kicked in. The peaceful retirement she had built for herself was about to be interrupted by violence, and she found herself slipping back into patterns of thought and preparation that she had hoped to leave behind forever. But Along with the stress came something else she hadn't felt in months: purpose. She began making preparations that would have been familiar to her former teammates. Weapons checked, communications checked, escape routes planned, and contingencies considered. Sarah was no longer a retired veteran trying to adjust to civilian life. She was an operator preparing for contact with hostile forces. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Sarah finally decided to return to the marina. She had monitored the radio chatter long enough to understand the basic outline of their plan and had formulated a response that would end the threat while minimizing the potential for escalation. Her goal was to discourage the thieves without creating a situation that would bring unwanted attention to her background or capabilities. As Second Chance approached the marina, Sarah could see the three men in position. Marcus was pretending to fish from the end of the main pier, while Danny and Rico were positioned near the fuel dock and the marina office respectively. Their placement was actually quite good for amateur criminals, providing good sight lines and multiple escape routes. Under different circumstances, Sarah might have complemented their tactical thinking. She guided her boat into its slip with the same calm efficiency she had displayed every day for 8 months, giving no indication that she was aware of being watched. Her movements were deliberate, but appeared casual as she secured the mooring lines and began her normal end-of-day routine. To the watching men, she seemed completely unaware of their presence and intent. Marcus spoke into his walkie-talkie, his voice carrying clearly to Sarah's concealed radio receiver. Target is secure and beginning shutdown procedures. Moving to Phase 2 in 5 minutes. Sarah continued her routine, washing down the deck and stowing her fishing gear. But her hands were moving with purpose beyond simple boat maintenance. Weapons were being positioned, communications equipment was being activated, and her mind was running through scenarios with the cold calculation of someone trained to survive contact with the enemy. The three men began their approach at exactly the time Marcus had indicated, walking casually towards Sarah's slip as if they were simply marina visitors out for an evening stroll. They moved with the confident swagger of predators approaching what they believed to be helpless prey. They had no idea they were walking into the engagement zone of someone who had spent 2 decades preparing for exactly this type of situation. Sarah heard their footsteps on the wooden dock and felt the familiar calm that came before action. Her heart rate slowed, her breathing deepened, and her awareness expanded to encompass every detail of her surroundings. Time seemed to slow as her training took over, and she found herself grateful for skills she had hoped never to use again. The confrontation that would change all their lives was about to begin. Marcus reached the edge of Sarah's slip first, his confident smile masking nervous energy as he prepared to begin what he thought would be a simple robbery. Danny and Rico flanked him, their positions blocking potential escape routes and providing backup if their target proved uncooperative. "Excuse me, ma'am," Marcus called out in a friendly voice that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. "I was wondering if you could help us with something." Sarah looked up from her work, her expression showing polite curiosity rather than alarm. To the three men, she appeared to be exactly what they had expected. An ordinary woman, alone and vulnerable, about to become the victim of their carefully planned crime. But Sarah Chun was many things. Ordinary was not one of them. As the three men prepared to reveal their true intentions, Sarah's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward a concealed weapon, her body language shifting in ways too subtle for untrained eyes to detect. 20 years of combat experience was about to collide with 3 amateur criminals who had made the mistake of choosing the wrong target. The quiet evening at Pelican Bay Marina was about to become anything but peaceful. Sarah straightened slowly from her work, her eyes meeting Marcus's with a level gaze that carried no trace of fear. She had dealt with far more dangerous men in far more threatening situations, and these 3 amateurs were broadcasting their intentions so clearly that she might as well have been reading their operation order. "Help with what exactly?" Sarah asked, her voice calm and conversational. She positioned herself so that the boat's cabin was at her back, providing both protection and access to additional resources if needed. Her stance appeared relaxed, but anyone with military training would have recognized the balanced, ready position of someone prepared for violence. Marcus took another step closer, his confidence growing as Sarah showed no signs of alarm. In his experience, victims usually sensed danger at this point and began showing nervousness or attempting to de-escalate the situation. Sarah's calm demeanor convinced him that she was either completely oblivious to the threat or simply naive about the reality of her situation. "Well, my friends and I have been watching this beautiful boat of yours," Marcus continued, his friendly mask beginning to slip. "We were wondering if you might be interested in taking us for a ride." Danny moved closer to the boat's starboard side, while Rico positioned himself near the dock's edge, cutting off potential escape routes. Their movements were coordinated, but lacked the precision of trained operators. Sarah cataloged their positions and capabilities with the automatic assessment process that had kept her alive in hostile waters around the world. Danny appeared nervous, constantly shifting his weight and glancing around the marina, as if expecting security to appear. His body language suggested he was the weak link in their group, likely to panic under pressure. Rico moved with more confidence, but his positioning revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of maritime tactics. He was blocking his own team's escape route while leaving Sarah multiple options for maneuvering. "I'm not really set up for passengers," Sarah replied, continuing to project the image of a cooperative but concerned boat owner. "The insurance doesn't cover guests, and it's getting pretty late in the day." Marcus's smile disappeared entirely as he realized that subtle intimidation wasn't working. He had expected Sarah to understand the implied threat by now and begin complying with his demands. Her continued resistance, even in the face of being outnumbered 3-1, was forcing him to escalate more quickly than he had planned. "I don't think you understand the situation here, lady," Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "We're not asking for a pleasure cruise. We're taking your boat, and you can either cooperate or we can do this the hard way." The threat hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the transition from potential conflict to active engagement. But instead of the fear that Marcus expected to see, Sarah's expression showed something that made him take an involuntary step backward: professional assessment. Sarah was no longer looking at Marcus as a fellow human being. She was evaluating him as a target, calculating distances, timing, and potential weapons with the cold efficiency of someone trained to neutralize threats. Her 20 years of experience in special operations had taught her to recognize the precise moment when violence became inevitable, and that moment had just arrived. "You know," Sarah said conversationally, "I've been in a lot of dangerous situations over the years. I've been shot at by pirates off Somalia, nearly blown up by underwater mines in the Persian Gulf, and boarded hostile vessels in the middle of the night with nothing but darkness and training to keep me alive." Marcus frowned, confused by this sudden change in topic. Danny and Rico exchanged glances, unsure whether Sarah was trying to distract them or simply babbling from fear. None of them recognized the calm, measured tone as the voice of someone who had killed enemies with her bare hands and lived to talk about it. "The thing about dangerous situations," Sarah continued, "is that they teach you to recognize real threats versus amateur hour bullshit. And, gentlemen, this is definitely amateur hour." Marcus's face flushed with anger at the implied insult. He had planned this operation carefully, assembled a competent team, and chosen what appeared to be an easy target. Being dismissed as an amateur by a middle-aged woman was not part of his script. "We'll see how tough you are when Rico here breaks a few of your fingers," Marcus snarled, gesturing for his partner to board the boat. Rico hesitated for a moment, something in Sarah's demeanor triggering an instinctive warning in his experienced criminal mind. He had spent time in prison with truly dangerous people, and Sarah's calm confidence in the face of overwhelming odds reminded him of the inmates who were left alone even by the most violent predators. But loyalty to his team and the promise of a significant payday overcame his caution. Rico stepped onto the boat's transom, his weight causing the vessel to rock slightly in the calm water. Sarah shifted her stance to compensate for the movement, her balance, and timing revealing years of experience on moving platforms. "Last chance, lady," Rico said, trying to project menace despite his growing unease. "We don't want to hurt you, but we will if we have to." Sarah's response was swift, decisive, and utterly devastating. Years of close-quarters combat training kicked in as Sarah moved with fluid precision that transformed her from apparent victim to lethal operator in the space of a heartbeat. Her left hand shot out to grab Rico's wrist as he reached toward her, while her right elbow drove upward into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over and drive the air from his lungs. Before Rico could even begin to react to the sudden assault, Sarah had pivoted on her left foot and used his own momentum to send him tumbling backward into the marina's murky water. The splash echoed across the quiet docks as Rico surfaced, gasping and disoriented, his grand plans for easy money dissolving along with his dignity. Marcus and Danny stared in shock as their intimidating partner floundered in the water, completely outmaneuvered by a woman they had dismissed as harmless. The casual efficiency of Sarah's movement spoke of training and experience that went far beyond anything they had anticipated. "Danny, get her!" Marcus shouted, his careful plan crumbling as he realized they had seriously misjudged their target. Danny fumbled for a knife he kept clipped inside his pocket, but his nervous energy and lack of combat experience made his movements clumsy and telegraphed. Sarah saw the blade coming long before Danny could bring it to bear, her trained eye tracking the weapon's path and calculating her response. Instead of backing away from the knife, Sarah moved forward into Danny's personal space, getting inside the arc of his swing and driving her knee upward into his midsection. The impact lifted Danny onto his toes and sent the knife spinning away across the dock as he collapsed, retching and gasping for breath. Marcus found himself facing a completely different situation than the one he had planned for. Instead of intimidating a frightened boat owner, he was confronting someone who had just disabled two grown men in a matter of seconds. Sarah's movements had been so quick and precise that he was still trying to process what had happened. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking slightly as the reality of his situation began to sink in. Sarah stepped over Danny's prone form with the casual indifference of someone stepping around a puddle. Her eyes never left Marcus as she moved, and he found himself involuntarily backing away from the quiet intensity of her gaze. "Someone you really shouldn't have tried to rob," Sarah replied simply. Marcus's hand moved toward a gun tucked into his waistband, but Sarah was already in motion. 20 years of training had taught her to recognize the preparatory movements that preceded weapons deployment, and she had learned long ago that speed and surprise were more reliable than hoping an opponent would hesitate. Sarah's approach was a textbook example of military close-quarters combat doctrine. She moved at an angle that made it difficult for Marcus to draw his weapon cleanly while simultaneously closing the distance between them. Her left hand struck his gun arm, numbing his fingers and preventing him from completing the draw, while her right hand found his throat in a grip that conveyed both her capability and her restraint. Marcus found himself pressed against the dock piling, unable to move and barely able to breathe, looking into the eyes of someone who had obviously done this before. The casual competence with which Sarah had neutralized his entire team was terrifying, but what frightened him most was the complete lack of emotion in her expression. She wasn't angry or excited or afraid. She was simply solving a tactical problem with professional efficiency. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. "You're going to call your friends out of the water, collect your weapons, and leave this marina. You're never coming back, and you're never going to bother me or anyone else here again." Marcus tried to speak, but found that Sarah's grip on his throat made conversation difficult. She eased the pressure slightly, allowing him to gasp out a response. "You can't just attack people," Marcus wheezed, his legal training from years of avoiding prosecution kicking in despite his current predicament. "This is assault. I'll call the cops." Sarah's expression didn't change, but Marcus felt a chill as something shifted in her eyes. The professional calculation was replaced by something colder and more personal. "You want to call the cops?" Sarah asked conversationally. "That's interesting. Let's talk about what we'll tell them." She released her grip on his throat, but maintained her position, keeping Marcus pinned against the piling while she spoke. "We'll tell them that 3 men with weapons attempted to commit maritime piracy against a retired military operator. We'll discuss your surveillance of this marina, your communications equipment, and your plan to steal a 42-foot vessel. We'll talk about conspiracy charges, federal maritime law, and the fact that attempted piracy carries some very serious penalties. Marcus's face went pale as he realized how thoroughly his situation had deteriorated. What had begun as a simple theft had escalated into federal crimes with significant prison time attached. But here's the really interesting part, Sarah continued, her voice never rising above conversational volume. When I ask about my background and why I was able to defend myself so effectively, I'll have to show them my identification. Sarah reached in her back pocket and withdrew a laminated card that she held where Marcus could see it clearly. His eyes widened as he read the official seal and designation that explained everything about the last few minutes of his life. The card identified Sarah as a retired special warfare operator with 20 years of active duty service. Even Marcus's limited knowledge of military terminology was sufficient to understand that he had just attempted to rob someone who was trained to kill people like him for a living. Holy shit, Marcus breathed, finally, understanding the magnitude of his mistake. Language, Sarah said mildly, but there was a hint of dark humor in her voice. Now, I'm going to let you go, and you're going to fish your friend out of the water, collect your other friend, and disappear. If I ever see any of you again, if I hear about you bothering anyone else at this marina, or if you decide to get clever and try to retaliate, I will find you. And when I find you, you'll discover that tonight was me being nice. Marcus nodded frantically. His earlier confidence completely evaporated in the face of Sarah's professional competence and barely contained lethality. He had thought he was robbing a civilian boat owner and instead had encountered a military operator who could have killed all three of them without working up a sweat. Sarah stepped back and gestured toward the water where Rico was still struggling to climb out onto the dock. Danny was beginning to stir, groaning as he tried to figure out why his midsection felt like it had been hit by a truck. "Move," Sarah ordered, and Marcus scrambled to comply. The next few minutes were a study in humiliation as Marcus helped Rico out of the water and assisted Danny to his feet. Both men were injured, waterlogged, and thoroughly demoralized by their encounter with someone who had turned their carefully planned crime into a tactical disaster. Sarah watched their retreat with the same professional attention she had given their approach, noting their vehicle, license plate, and general direction of travel. Old habits died hard, and intelligence gathering was second nature to someone with her background. As the three men limped away from the marina, nursing their wounds and their wounded pride, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of satisfaction and regret. She was satisfied that she had defended herself effectively and neutralized a threat without causing permanent harm. But she regretted that her peaceful retirement had been interrupted by violence, even violence that she hadn't initiated. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind the crash that always followed combat. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she secured her boat and collected the knife that Danny had dropped. Tomorrow she would need to consider whether the marina was still a safe refuge or whether it was time to move on once again. But tonight, she was alive, unharmed, and had successfully defended her home. For someone with a background, that counted as a victory, even if it came with complications she would rather have avoided. Sarah looked out over the peaceful water of the marina, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, three amateur criminals were learning that appearances could be deceiving and that some people were far more dangerous than they looked. The quiet woman with the fishing boat had reminded them that the world was full of surprises, and not all of them were pleasant. The following morning brought an unexpected complication to what Sarah had hoped would be a return to normalcy. She was performing routine maintenance on her boat's engine when Tom Rodriguez, the marina manager, approached her slip with obvious concern etched across his weathered face. "Sarah, we need to talk," Tom said, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by professional seriousness. "I got a call this morning from someone claiming that you assaulted 3 men here yesterday evening." Sarah continued her work on the engine, her hands steady as she adjusted a fuel line connection. She had been expecting this conversation since the moment Marcus and his friends had limped away from the marina. Amateur criminals often tried to turn tables on their intended victims when their plans went sideways. That's an interesting way to describe attempted robbery, Sarah replied without looking up from her work. What exactly did they tell you? Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between his responsibility to investigate incidents at his marina and his respect for one of his most reliable tenants. Sarah had been nothing but professional during her 8 months at Pelican Bay, paying her fees promptly and causing no trouble whatsoever. They claimed they were just asking directions when you attacked them unprovoked, Tom said. One of them mentioned weapons and something about military identification. Sarah, I need to know what really happened here. Sarah finally looked up from her engine work, meeting Tom's eyes with the same level gaze that had unnerved Marcus the night before. She had dealt with suspicious authority figures in dozens of countries and understood that honesty, carefully applied, was usually the best policy. 3 men have been watching my boat for weeks, Sarah said simply. Yesterday, they approached with the intention of stealing it. They made threats, one of them was armed, and I defended myself using appropriate force. End of story. Tom studied her face, looking for signs of deception or uncertainty. What he saw instead was the quiet confidence of someone who had told the absolute truth and felt no need to elaborate or justify her actions. They mentioned military ID, Tom pressed. Sarah, what exactly is your background? Sarah wiped her hands on a shop rag, considering how much information to share. Her instinct was to maintain operational security, but the situation required some disclosure to prevent unnecessary complications. Navy, 20 years, Sarah said. Special operations. I retired 8 months ago and bought this boat because I wanted a peaceful place to readjust to civilian life. Those 3 idiots decided to interfere with that plan. The simple statement carried implications that Tom was smart enough to recognize. Special operations personnel weren't ordinary military members. They were the people who handled situations that regular forces couldn't manage, and their training reflected that reality. Jesus Christ, Sarah, Tom breathed, suddenly, understanding why 3 grown men had been unable to overpower one middle-aged woman. No wonder they're too embarrassed to call the cops themselves. Sarah smiled grimly at his assessment. They called you instead of the police because they know their story wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. 3 men with weapons claim they were innocently asking directions from someone who just happened to be a retired special operator? No prosecutor would waste time on that case. Tom nodded slowly, his concern shifting from Sarah's actions to the security implications for his marina. If word got out that criminals were targeting boats at Pelican Bay, it could damage the facility's reputation and drive away customers. What do you need from me? Tom asked, his tone making it clear that he believed Sarah's version of events. Nothing dramatic, Sarah replied. Maybe mention to your security guard that he should actually patrol the docks instead of doing crossword puzzles in his office. And consider installing some basic surveillance equipment. What happened to me could happen to any boat owner here. Tom agreed readily, grateful that Sarah wasn't demanding more significant changes or threatening to leave the marina. Her presence had actually been beneficial for the facility. Other boat owners respected her expertise and often sought her advice on mechanical problems. As Tom walked away, Sarah returned to her engine maintenance, but her mind was working on a different problem. The confrontation with Marcus and his friends had been satisfying in a tactical sense, but it had also reminded her of capabilities that she was trying to leave behind. The smooth efficiency with which she had neutralized 3 armed men had felt natural in a way that concerned her. Dr. Martinez had warned her about this during their sessions. Military personnel transitioning to civilian life often struggled with situations that triggered their combat training. The adrenaline rush of successful tactical action could be addictive, making it difficult to adjust to the mundane realities of peaceful existence. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She considered ignoring it, but her ingrained operational security habits made her answer on the chance that it might be important. Hello, Sarah said, her voice neutral and noncommittal. This is Marcus Webb, came the reply, and Sarah immediately recognized the voice of the previous evening's would-be boat thief. We need to talk. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest as her threat assessment protocols automatically activated. Marcus calling her directly suggested either desperation or escalation, neither of which boded well for her continued peaceful existence. "I thought we covered everything necessary last night," Sarah replied, her tone carrying a warning that Marcus was smart enough to recognize. "Look, I know we screwed up," Marcus said, his voice carrying none of the confidence he had displayed before learning about Sarah's background. "But you humiliated us. Rico's got a separated shoulder, Danny's pissing blood, and word is getting around that we got our asses kicked by some boat lady." Sarah processed this information with professional interest. Marcus was calling because his reputation in the criminal community had been damaged, which suggested that he viewed last night's events as a problem requiring resolution rather than a lesson to be learned. "That sounds like a personal problem," Sarah said. "I defended my property against armed criminals. If that damaged your reputation, perhaps you should consider a different line of work." "You don't understand," Marcus continued, desperation creeping into his voice. "People are laughing at us. Nobody's going to respect us if they think we can't handle one woman." Sarah's assessment of the situation shifted as she recognized the dynamic at play. Marcus wasn't calling to threaten her or demand satisfaction. He was calling because his criminal career was in jeopardy, and he was hoping she might help him salvage it somehow. "What exactly do you want from me?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We need a way to save face," Marcus said. "Maybe you could tell people that there are more of us, or that you had help, or something that doesn't make us look like complete amateurs." Sarah almost laughed at the request. Marcus was asking her to lie to protect the reputation of people who had tried to rob her at gunpoint. The irony was so complete that she found herself genuinely impressed by his audacity. "Let me understand this correctly," Sarah said slowly. "You want me to help protect your criminal reputation after you attempted to steal my boat?" "It would benefit both of us," Marcus said quickly. "If people think we're weak, someone might try to muscle in on our territory. That could mean more crime around your marina." The logic was twisted, but not entirely wrong. Criminal hierarchies operated on perceptions of strength and capability. If Marcus and his crew were seen as ineffective, other criminals might indeed view the marina as an easy target. But Sarah had no intention of helping criminals maintain their reputations, regardless of the potential consequences. Her training had taught her that accommodating threats only encouraged escalation. "Here's my counteroffer," Sarah said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she had used to give orders in combat zones. "You and your friends find a different line of work. Something legal, legitimate, and far away from this marina. In return, I won't share your names and descriptions with every law enforcement contact I've maintained over the past 20 years. There was silence on the other end of the line as Marcus processed the implications of her threat. Former Special Operations personnel typically maintained extensive networks within law enforcement and intelligence communities. Sarah's contacts could make life very difficult for small-time criminals like Marcus and his crew. "You can't do that," Marcus protested weakly. "We haven't been convicted of anything." "I don't need convictions to share intelligence about suspicious individuals with appropriate authorities," Sarah replied. "Career criminals like you leave patterns that trained investigators can recognize. All I have to do is point them in the right direction." Marcus fell silent again, and Sarah could almost hear him calculating the potential consequences of having his activities subjected to professional scrutiny. Small-time criminals survive by staying below the radar of serious law enforcement attention. "This isn't over," Marcus said finally, though his tone suggested bravado rather than genuine confidence. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied firmly. "Unless you want it to become much worse for you very quickly." She ended the call and immediately began considering her options. Marcus's phone call suggested that he wasn't going to accept last night's lesson and move on with his life. His criminal pride had been wounded, and that made him potentially dangerous in unpredictable ways. Sarah's first instinct was to eliminate the threat permanently using methods she had learned in hostile waters around the world. But those methods belonged to her old life, and using them would undo months of progress toward successful civilian reintegration. Instead, she decided to apply a different set of skills from her military background: intelligence gathering and threat assessment. Sarah spent the next several hours conducting research that would have impressed her former commanders. Using publicly available resources and techniques she had learned in counterintelligence training, she compiled detailed profiles on Marcus Webb, Danny Price, and Rico Santos. Marcus had been arrested multiple times for theft, fraud, and assault, but had managed to avoid serious prison time through plea bargains and good legal representation. His criminal career showed a pattern of escalating ambition, but consistently poor execution. The boat theft attempt was actually more sophisticated than his usual crimes, suggesting either outside assistance or genuine evolution in his capabilities. Danny Price had a gambling addiction that had driven him from legitimate work as a mechanic into increasingly desperate criminal activities. His record showed multiple arrests for theft and one conviction for assault during a bar fight over gambling debts. He was the weak link in their group, likely to break under pressure if law enforcement took serious interest in his activities. Rico Santos was more dangerous than his partners. A former gang member with a lengthy prison record, he had connections to organized crime networks and access to serious weapons. His involvement with Marcus and Danny represented either a step down in his criminal career or part of a larger operation that wasn't immediately apparent. Armed with this intelligence, Sarah began making strategic phone calls to contacts she had maintained within law enforcement communities. She was careful to present her information as general security concerns rather than specific threats, allowing the authorities to draw their own conclusions about appropriate responses. Detective Maria Gonzalez of the County Sheriff's Department had worked with military personnel often enough to recognize the professional competence in Sarah's voice when she called to report suspicious activity at the marina. The information Sarah provided was specific, actionable, and presented in the kind of organized format that made investigation straightforward. Within hours, Marcus Webb found himself under surveillance by people far more competent than the Marine Patrol officers he usually avoided. His phone calls were being monitored, his financial activities were being scrutinized, and his associates were being identified through techniques that made his own criminal intelligence gathering look primitive by comparison. Sarah monitored the developing situation through news reports and conversations with her law enforcement contacts. She was pleased to see that professional investigators were taking the threat seriously and applying appropriate resources to neutralize it. But she was also concerned about the implications for her own future. Using her military contacts to address civilian problems was exactly the kind of behavior that Dr. Martinez had warned her about. The boundary between her old life and her new one was becoming blurred in ways that could complicate her continued adjustment to peaceful existence. That evening, as Sarah worked on her boat under the marina's security lights, she reflected on the events of the past 2 days. She had successfully defended her property and neutralized a threat to her safety. But she had also discovered that her military skills remained sharp and readily accessible, which raised questions about whether she was truly prepared for the kind of retirement she claimed to want. The confrontation with Marcus and his crew had reminded her that she was very good at violence, and that violence could be satisfying in ways that civilian life rarely matched. Those were dangerous realizations for someone trying to build a peaceful future. Sarah's contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Gonzalez, who approached her slip with the professional bearing of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Miss Chun, I'm Detective Gonzalez. I believe you called our department earlier today about suspicious activity at this marina." Sarah looked up from her work, meeting the detective's eyes with the calm attention of someone who had nothing to hide. "That's correct," Sarah said. 3 men had been conducting surveillance on boats here. Yesterday evening, they escalated to attempted theft with threats of violence. I thought you should be aware of the situation. Detective Gonzalez studied Sarah's face, looking for inconsistencies or signs of deception. What she saw instead was the professional competence of someone accustomed to giving accurate reports under pressure. "We've been investigating the individuals you identified," Detective Gonzalez said. "Preliminary evidence suggests they've been involved in similar activities at other marinas. Your information has been very helpful in building our case." Sarah nodded acknowledgement, but didn't volunteer additional information. Her military training had taught her to provide complete answers to direct questions while avoiding unnecessary elaboration that might complicate situations. I understand you have military experience, Detective Gonzalez continued. Would you be willing to provide a detailed statement about what happened here yesterday? Sarah considered the request carefully. Providing an official statement would create a permanent record of the incident and potentially expose details about her background that she preferred to keep private. But refusing to cooperate with law enforcement could create different problems. I'll provide a statement, Sarah agreed. But I prefer to keep certain aspects of my military service classified unless absolutely necessary for your investigation. Detective Gonzalez smiled, recognizing the careful language of someone familiar with operational security requirements. That shouldn't be a problem, she assured Sarah. We're more interested in what happened here than in your service record. As the two women walked toward the Marina office to complete the paperwork, Sarah felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and concern about the direction her life was taking. She had successfully defended herself and was cooperating with legitimate authorities to address ongoing threats. But she was also using skills and contacts from her military background to solve civilian problems, which suggested that her transition to peaceful retirement might be more complicated than she had hoped. The quiet woman with the fishing boat was discovering that leaving her old life behind might be more difficult than she had anticipated. 3 weeks after the attempted robbery, Sarah thought the incident was becoming a fading memory when Detective Gonzalez returned to the marina with news that would complicate her peaceful existence in ways she hadn't anticipated. We arrested Webb and his crew yesterday, Detective Gonzalez announced as she approached Sarah's slip. But during the interrogation, something interesting came up that I thought you should know about. Sarah looked up from a navigation charts she was updating, her expression showing polite interest rather than concern. She had expected the arrests based on the intelligence she had provided and assumed that would be the end of her involvement in the matter. What kind of interesting? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she was prepared for complications. Detective Gonzalez pulled out a small notebook and flipped to a page marked with several tabs. Rico Santos started talking when we offered him a deal on some outstanding warrants. According to him, they weren't working alone. Someone hired them specifically to target your boat. Sarah's hands stilled on the charts as she processed this information. A targeted operation against her personally was very different from random criminal opportunity. It suggested knowledge of her background, resources, or activities that extended beyond what casual observation could provide. Did Santos identify who hired them? Sarah asked, her voice maintaining its calm tone despite the tactical implications racing through her mind. That's where it gets complicated, Detective Gonzalez replied. Santos claims he never met the person directly. All communication was through Marcus, who says he was contacted through intermediaries. But here's the interesting part. Whoever hired them knew enough about your boat and your routine to provide detailed intelligence. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with threat escalation. Someone with resources and operational capability had targeted her specifically, using local criminals as expendable assets. That suggested either professional criminals with intelligence networks or something much worse. People from her old life who had reasons to want her neutralized. What kind of intelligence? Sarah asked, though she was already beginning to formulate response plans based on various threat scenarios. Detective Gonzalez consulted her notes again. Detailed information about your boat's equipment, your daily routine, the marina's security procedures, and even some background on your military service. Santos says Marcus bragged about having inside information that made the job foolproof. Sarah's threat assessment shifted dramatically as she realized the implications. Detailed knowledge of her military background wasn't something that casual criminals could access through normal channels. Either someone had conducted professional intelligence gathering on her, or someone with official access to her service records was involved. Detective, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer, Sarah said, her tone taking on the authoritative edge that had characterized her military communications. Is this investigation being monitored by federal agencies? Detective Gonzalez looked surprised by the question, then concerned as she considered its implications. Not that I'm aware of, but federal involvement wouldn't necessarily be disclosed to local law enforcement. Why do you ask? Sarah was already calculating her options. If federal agencies were involved, it could mean anything from routine counterintelligence monitoring to active threats from foreign operatives. Her military service had created enemies in multiple countries, and some of those enemies had long memories and extensive resources. My military service involved classified operations in hostile environments, Sarah explained carefully. The kind of detailed intelligence you're describing suggests either federal surveillance or foreign intelligence gathering. Either way, it means this situation is more serious than local crime. Detective Gonzalez's expression grew grave as she understood the implications. Are you saying we might be dealing with espionage or terrorism? I'm saying we might be dealing with people who have resources and motivations that local law enforcement isn't equipped to handle, Sarah replied. I need to make some phone calls to determine whether this is connected to my military service. As Detective Gonzalez left to coordinate with federal authorities, Sarah began implementing security protocols she had hoped never to use again. Her peaceful retirement was officially over, and her old life was asserting itself in ways that threatened not only her safety, but potentially national security. Sarah's first call was to Colonel James Mitchell, her former commanding officer who now worked in Pentagon intelligence coordination. Mitchell had always told his former operators that they could contact him if civilian life created complications related to their military service. Chin, good to hear from you, Mitchell said when he recognized her voice. How's retirement treating you? It's complicated, sir, Sarah replied, slipping back into military communication protocols without conscious thought. I need threat assessment on a situation that might be connected to my service record. Mitchell's tone immediately became professional as he recognized the coded language Sarah was using to indicate a potential security breach. Secure line, Mitchell asked. Negative, but immediate assessment required, Sarah responded, indicating that the situation was urgent enough to risk unsecured communication. Understood. Give me the basics. Sarah provided a concise briefing on the attempted robbery, the subsequent investigation, and the intelligence that suggested professional targeting. She was careful to use language that would convey the essential information without revealing classified details over an open line. Mitchell listened without interruption, then asked several pointed questions about specific details that helped him assess the potential threat level. Chun, I'm going to make some calls and get back to you within 4 hours, Mitchell said finally. In the meantime, implement Level 2 security protocols and prepare for potential relocation. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of dread and anticipation as she received what amounted to activation orders. Level 2 security protocols meant assuming active surveillance and potential hostile contact. Preparing for relocation meant her peaceful life at the marina was probably ending permanently. After ending the call with Mitchell, Sarah began implementing security measures that transformed her from retired boat owner to active operator within the space of an hour. Weapons were retrieved from concealed storage and positioned for immediate access. Communications equipment was activated and configured for encrypted transmission. Surveillance countermeasures were deployed to detect potential observation. Most importantly, Sarah began preparing second chance for emergency departure. Fuel tanks were topped off, navigation equipment was programmed with multiple route options, and emergency supplies were stocked for extended operations at sea. Her preparations were interrupted by the arrival of Tom Rodriguez, the marina manager, who approached her slip with obvious concern about the unusual level of activity around her boat. Sarah, Detective Gonzalez told me there might be federal agents coming to the marina, Tom said nervously. She mentioned something about your military service and potential security issues. What exactly is going on? Sarah paused in her preparations to consider how much information to share with Tom. His cooperation might be essential for maintaining operational security, but too much knowledge could make him a target if the situation escalated. Someone with significant resources has been targeting me because of my military background, Sarah explained. Federal authorities are investigating whether this represents a national security threat. The marina might be under surveillance, and other boat owners could potentially be at risk. Tom's face went pale as he realized that his quiet marina had become involved in what sounded like an espionage operation. Jesus Christ, Sarah, should I be evacuating people? Calling the Coast Guard? What do I do in a situation like this? Sarah appreciated his willingness to take responsibility for his tenant's safety, but she also recognized that panicking civilians would complicate any security response. Continue normal operations for now, Sarah advised. Federal authorities will coordinate any necessary security measures. Just be aware that strangers asking questions about me or other boat owners should be reported immediately. Tom nodded and hurried away to brief his staff, leaving Sarah to continue her preparations. She had just finished programming her navigation computer when her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Colonel Mitchell. "Chun, we have a problem," Mitchell said without preamble. "Your service record was accessed 2 months ago through unofficial channels. Someone with significant computer skills hacked into classified personnel databases and downloaded your complete operational history." Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. Her operational history contained details about classified missions, foreign contacts, and intelligence assets that could compromise national security if disclosed to hostile agencies. "Do we know who accessed the files?" Sarah asked. "Negative, but the intrusion showed professional capability consistent with foreign intelligence services. We're treating this as a potential espionage operation targeting former special operations personnel." Sarah's threat assessment escalated immediately as she understood that she was facing something much more dangerous than local criminals. Foreign intelligence services had resources, training, and motivations that made them extremely dangerous opponents. "Want my orders, sir?" Sarah asked, automatically reverting to military protocol. "No official orders, Chun. You're a civilian now," Mitchell reminded her. "But if I were advising a friend, I'd suggest that remaining stationary and predictable might not be the best survival strategy." The coded language was clear. Sarah was being unofficially advised to go operational and disappear until the threat could be identified and neutralized. "Understood, sir. I'll implement appropriate defensive measures." "Chun," Mitchell added before ending the call, "watch your back. If foreign intelligence is involved, they'll have professional operators working this. The amateurs you handled last week were just the opening move." As Sarah ended the call, she felt the familiar combination of fear and excitement that came with high-stakes operations. Her peaceful retirement was definitely over, but her survival skills were about to be tested by opponents worthy of her training. Sarah spent the next hour making final preparations for departure while monitoring local communications and surveillance indicators. She was pleased to note that her operational skills remained sharp despite months of civilian life. Her preparations were interrupted by the appearance of a well-dressed woman who approached the marina on foot, moving with the kind of casual confidence that immediately triggered Sarah's threat recognition protocols. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s, with dark hair and Mediterranean features. Her clothing was expensive but practical, and she moved with the kind of athletic grace that suggested serious physical training. Most significantly, her approach pattern and observation techniques revealed professional surveillance capabilities. Sarah continued her apparent boat maintenance while tracking the woman's movement through her peripheral vision. The visitor was conducting reconnaissance, noting escape routes, security cameras, and potential civilian hazards with the systematic thoroughness of someone planning an operation. When a woman reached Sarah's slip, she smiled with practiced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said in lightly accented English. "I'm looking for Sarah Chun. I believe she owns this boat." Sarah looked up from her work, meeting the woman's gaze with polite interest that concealed her immediate threat assessment. The accent was Eastern European, possibly Bulgarian or Romanian. The woman's stance and positioning revealed weapons concealment and close-quarters combat training. "I'm Sarah Chun," Sarah replied conversationally. "Can I help you with something?" "My name is Elena Volkov," the woman said, her smile becoming more genuine as she apparently achieved her objective. "I represent some people who are very interested in your military service and would like to offer you a business opportunity." Sarah felt adrenaline surge through her system as she realized that the operational phase of this confrontation was beginning. Elena Volkov was almost certainly a foreign intelligence operative, and her presence at the marina meant that Sarah's position was compromised. "I'm retired from military service," Sarah said carefully. "I'm not interested in any business opportunities related to that background." Elena's smile widened. and Sarah caught a glimpse of something predatory in her expression. "I think you'll find our offer very compelling," Elena continued, "especially considering the alternative consequences of refusing to cooperate." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Sarah realized that her quiet confrontation with three amateur criminals had escalated into something that could threaten national security. Elena Volkov and whoever she represented were playing for much higher stakes than simple robbery. Sarah's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward a concealed weapon as she prepared for the possibility that her marina berth was about to become a battlefield. "I think you should leave," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made Elena take an involuntary step backward. "I don't think you understand the situation," Elena replied, her friendly mask slipping to reveal professional calculation underneath. "We know everything about your military service. We know about your classified operations. And we know that certain government agencies would be very interested in some of your unauthorized activities." Sarah realized that Elena was attempting to use blackmail based on classified information that had been stolen from government databases. It was a sophisticated operation that combined cyber espionage with traditional field intelligence work. But Elena had made a critical error in her assessment. Sarah Chin wasn't a frightened retiree who could be intimidated by threats. She was a special operations veteran who had faced much more dangerous opponents in much more hostile environments. The peaceful marina was about to become the setting for a confrontation between two highly trained operators, with national security hanging in the balance. Sarah's retirement was officially over, and her war was just beginning. Sarah's response to Elena's threat was swift and decisive, drawing on 20 years of experience dealing with hostile intelligence operatives in environments where hesitation meant death. Instead of backing down or attempting negotiation, Sarah stepped forward into Elena's personal space with fluid movement that demonstrated her tactical superiority. Before Elena could react to the sudden shift in dynamics, Sarah's left hand had captured her wrist while her right hand pressed against Elena's throat with precisely calculated pressure. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death decision-making. "You're going to signal your backup team to stand down, then you're going to answer some questions about who sent you and what they really want." Elena's eyes widened in surprise as she realized how thoroughly she had misjudged her target. Sarah's movement had been too quick and precise for Elena to counter, despite her own extensive training in close-quarters combat. "There is no backup team," Elena gasped, struggling against Sarah's grip without success. Sarah increased the pressure slightly, causing Elena to go rigid as she felt her airway beginning to constrict. "Wrong answer," Sarah said calmly. "Professional operators don't work alone, especially on foreign soil." "Where are they positioned?" Elena's training kicked in as she attempted to break Sarah's hold using techniques learned in Spetsnaz academies. But Sarah had anticipated the counter moves and adjusted her position accordingly, maintaining control while demonstrating that Elena was outmatched both technically and tactically. "Waterfront warehouse, 200 meters north," Elena admitted reluctantly. "Two operators with long-range capabilities." Sarah processed this information while maintaining her tactical advantage. A sniper team positioned in an overwatch position meant this operation had been planned with significant resources and professional capability. "Radio frequency?" Sarah demanded. "Channel 7, encrypted commercial band." Elena responded, her professional pride warring with her need to breathe normally. Sarah released her grip on Elena's throat, but maintained control of her wrist, keeping the foreign operative off balance and unable to mount an effective resistance. "Call them off," Sarah ordered. "Tell them the operation is compromised and they need to extract immediately." Elena hesitated, clearly reluctant to abort an operation that had required significant planning and resources. But Sarah's demonstration of superior capability had made it clear that continued resistance would be both futile and potentially fatal. Elena spoke rapidly into a concealed radio microphone, using coded language that Sarah recognized as standard extraction protocols. The foreign operatives team was professional enough to respond immediately to abort orders, which suggested serious training and operational discipline. "Now," Sarah continued, You're going to explain exactly what organization you represent and what they want with me. Elena straightened her clothing and attempted to regain some semblance of professional composure. But Sarah's continued positioning made it clear that any aggressive movement would be met with immediate and overwhelming response. I represent business interests that have need for someone with your specific capabilities, Elena said carefully. Your military record indicates expertise in maritime operations that could be valuable for certain commercial ventures. Sarah recognized the euphemistic language as typical of intelligence operations that needed plausible deniability. Commercial ventures usually meant activities that were illegal, immoral, or both. Be more specific, Sarah demanded. What kind of commercial ventures require the services of a retired special operations veteran? Elena's hesitation revealed internal conflict between operational security requirements and her need to provide information that might prevent Sarah from escalating the situation further. Maritime security consulting, Elena said finally. Protecting high-value cargo shipments in international waters where traditional security is insufficient. Sarah translated this immediately. Elena's organization wanted to recruit her for private military operations, probably involving activities that official military forces couldn't or wouldn't undertake. Given Elena's apparent nationality and the sophisticated nature of their intelligence gathering, this likely meant Russian or Eastern European criminal organizations with government connections. And if I refuse your generous offer? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Elena's expression hardened as she realized that subtle persuasion had failed and more direct methods would be necessary. Refusal would be inadvisable, Elena said coldly. Your military service involved certain activities that could be embarrassing if disclosed publicly. Additionally, accidents happen to former military personnel who fail to appreciate new opportunities. The combination of blackmail and death threats confirmed Sarah's assessment that Elena represented serious organized crime with intelligence agency connections. This was exactly the kind of post-military complication that her former commanders had warned her about. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. Instead of attempting further negotiation, she activated emergency protocols that would bring federal law enforcement resources to bear on the situation. A concealed transmitter in her pocket sent an automated distress signal to contacts in multiple agencies, providing GPS coordinates and a coded message indicating foreign intelligence activity requiring immediate response. Within minutes, the marina would be swarming with federal agents equipped to handle international threats. Elena apparently recognized the signs of emergency activation because her demeanor shifted from threatening to desperate as she realized her operation was collapsing. You don't understand what you're doing, Elena said urgently. My organization has resources and reach that your government cannot protect you from. This is bigger than local law enforcement can handle. Sarah smiled grimly at Elena's attempt to regain psychological advantage through intimidation. You're right about one thing, Sarah replied. This is bigger than local law enforcement. That's why I just activated federal protocols that will bring people to this marina who specialize in dealing with foreign intelligence threats. Elena's face went pale as she realized that her sophisticated operation had just been countered by someone with better resources and superior tactical knowledge. Foreign intelligence operatives were extremely vulnerable when caught operating without diplomatic cover on American soil. You have perhaps 10 minutes before this place is surrounded by federal agents, Sarah continued conversationally. I suggest you use that time to disappear permanently, because if they catch you here, you'll spend the rest of your life in a federal prison explaining your organization's activities to people who are very good at extracting information. Elena backed away from Sarah, her training telling her to extract immediately while she still had the opportunity. But her operational pride made her attempt one final threat. This isn't over, Elena said as she began moving toward the marina's exit. My organization has long reach and longer memory. No, Sarah replied quietly, it really is over. Because you just made the mistake of threatening a United States citizen on American soil. That makes your organization a federal law enforcement priority, and federal law enforcement is very good at making problems disappear permanently. Elena's departure was swift and professional but Sarah could see the signs of an operator whose mission had failed catastrophically. Elena's organization had invested significant resources in an operation that had not only failed to achieve its objectives, but had also exposed their activities to federal scrutiny. Sarah spent the next few minutes securing her boat and preparing for the arrival of federal agents. Her peaceful retirement was definitely over, but the transition back to operational status felt more natural than she had expected. The first federal agents arrived within 8 minutes of Sarah's emergency signal, moving with tactical precision that indicated serious capability and preparation. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh led the response team, approaching Sarah's slip with professional competence that immediately earned Sarah's respect. MS. Chun, I'm Special Agent Walsh with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, Agent Walsh announced. We received your emergency signal and are prepared to provide whatever assistance you need. Sarah briefed Agent Walsh on the situation with the same professional efficiency she had used for military debriefings. She provided detailed descriptions of Elena Volkov and her team, analysis of their apparent capabilities and objectives, and assessment of the ongoing threat they represented. Agent Walsh listened carefully, asking pointed questions that revealed her own experience with foreign intelligence operations. Ms. Chun, based on your description, this appears to be a Russian or Eastern European intelligence operation targeting former military personnel for recruitment or elimination, Agent Walsh concluded. This is the third case we've seen in the past 6 months. Sarah felt a chill as she realized that her situation wasn't unique. Foreign intelligence services were apparently conducting systematic operations against American military veterans, seeking to exploit their skills or neutralize potential threats. Are other veterans being targeted? Sarah asked. Yes, and with increasing frequency, Agent Walsh confirmed. Someone is using stolen personnel records to identify former special operations personnel and either recruit them for private military work or eliminate them if they refuse to cooperate. Sarah's assessment of the threat escalated as she understood that she was facing an ongoing campaign rather than an isolated incident. This was exactly the kind of situation that required coordinated federal response and could potentially affect national security. What do you need from me? Sarah asked, automatically reverting to mission-focused thinking. We need your continued cooperation in identifying and neutralizing this threat, Agent Walsh replied. Your expertise and experience make you valuable both as a witness and as a potential asset in our counterintelligence operations. Sarah considered the implications carefully. Accepting federal cooperation would mean abandoning her retirement permanently and returning to a world of classified operations and life-or-death stakes. But refusing to help could mean that other veterans would face the same threats without adequate protection. I'm willing to cooperate, Sarah said finally. But I have conditions. Agent Walsh nodded, recognizing the negotiating position of someone with valuable skills and legitimate concerns about their future. What conditions? Agent Walsh asked. First, any operations I participate in must be legal and officially authorized, Sarah said. Second, my identity and background remain classified unless disclosure is absolutely necessary. Third, this cooperation is temporary and ends when the immediate threat is neutralized. Agent Walsh smiled, appreciating Sarah's professional approach to a complex situation. Those conditions are acceptable, Agent Walsh agreed. Welcome back to active service, Ms. Chun. As federal agents secured the marina and began processing the intelligence Sarah had provided, she reflected on the unexpected turn her retirement had taken. She had sought peaceful isolation and found herself drawn back into a world of international threats and classified operations. But as she watched the professional competence of the federal response team, Sarah realized that her skills and experience were still needed and valued. The transition from military service to civilian life had been difficult, but the transition back to operational status felt like coming home. 6 months later, Sarah Chun stood on the deck of a new boat in a different marina, watching the sunset over water that held no threats or complications from her past. The operation against the Foreign Intelligence Network had been successful, resulting in multiple arrests and the disruption of recruitment activities targeting American veterans. Elena Volkov and her organization had been neutralized through methods that Sarah couldn't discuss, but had been personally satisfying to implement. The stolen personnel records had been recovered, and the security vulnerabilities that had enabled the breach had been corrected. Sarah's cooperation with federal authorities had earned her a new identity and a fresh start in a location where her background was known only to people who needed to know it for security reasons. She remained available for consultation on matters affecting veteran security, but her active operational days were officially over. The three amateur criminals who had started the entire chain of events by attempting to rob her boat had been sentenced to federal prison terms that would keep them away from marina communities for the foreseeable future. Marcus Webb's criminal career had ended with the kind of permanent finality that discouraged others from similar activities. Tom Rodriguez had been relocated to manage a different marina after federal authorities determined that his facility had been too thoroughly compromised for continued operations. He remained grateful to Sarah for preventing what could have been a much worse situation involving civilian casualties. As Sarah prepared her new boat for another peaceful evening of fishing, she reflected on the lessons learned from her brief return to active operations. Her military skills remained sharp and valuable, but they were tools that belonged to specific situations rather than defining characteristics of her identity. The woman who had once been known only as a special operations veteran had learned to balance her past with her future, accepting both the responsibilities that came with her capabilities and the peaceful moments that made those responsibilities worthwhile. Sarah Chun had finally found her way home, even if that home was on the water and constantly moving toward new horizons. Some battles were worth fighting, some skills were worth maintaining, and some peace was worth defending with whatever force was necessary. The quiet woman with the fishing boat had learned that retirement didn't mean the end of service, just a different kind of mission with different objectives and different definitions of success. And sometimes the most important victories were the ones that let you go fishing the next morning without looking over your shoulder for threats that no longer existed.